there are a lot of people who would rather not store things, even in a very reputable institution like BRICS. There is wisdom in the statement that if you don't own it physically, or possess it, you don't own it. Now, that's really not true.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics as we pick up our coverage following Labor Day. Hope everybody had a great holiday weekend, got a little bit of a breather in there. And of course, the silver market keeps on going, as will we. So joining me once again for our Tuesday physical silver market update is Andy Schectman of Miles Franklin. And Andy, hope you had a good weekend as well. Nice to have you back. And how's everything going today?
Going good, brother. Yeah, these 3-day weekends, I'm actually going to, if I were running for president, that would be my primary platform, that we transition to 3-day weekends. It's nice having that extra day. You wake up Saturday morning and think you got to start preparing for tomorrow being Monday, and then you're like, oh wait, there's still 2 more days. So never long enough, but always good to see your face, brother, and good to be back again.
Well, good to have you here. And as we start off the week, silver down a little bit today, a quarter on the Kitco chart, which brings us back just roughly to about even on the year. Certainly an eventful year it's been. Banking issues, everyone waiting for the Fed to see when they are finished hiking. Has not happened. Well, it may have happened so far. We'll find out a little bit more in just a couple of weeks at the Fed's latest meeting. But to start things off, would like to get an update as we cover each week on what's going on with the premiums and how customers are reacting to the latest developments in silver right now.
Look, it's interesting. The price, really, I think the people who are actively in this market understand what's going on with the price. They understand that it is being done to maintain an illusion of strength and stability in a currency that is fractured and fragmented and starting to lose share of its global dominance. And I think that price is less of a hindrance in terms of its counterintuitive action or its non-performance yet. I think people are understanding, even if it frustrates them, that deep down this is a good thing. This is a subsidy. You don't walk into Nordstrom's and those that are still open that aren't being closed because of theft, but you walk into one and the pair of jeans you want are on sale. You don't say, crap, I wish I could pay full price. Now that's a clever way of saying it. I'm not trying to be, but what I'm saying is that the people have greater understanding now, largely in part to things that you say and the reinforcement of the broader fundamentals that people understand. So look, I know people would like to see prices moving much higher. We always say, be careful what you wish for. And the longer they're able to maintain the illusion of status quo, the better value it is. And I guess you just have to ask yourself, if you're frustrated by the lack of price performance, would you rather have everything falling apart and things really getting interesting on multiple levels, geopolitical and political and social, and all of the things that would impact our lives with a higher price in silver, tailing along? That's going to come, but let's not rush it. I think the fundamentals are so strong right now that before we know it, those types of prices will be evident. But I'm more concerned about what comes along with it. But hey, look, gold just hit I believe its all-time high in China and Japan just on Friday. So, or maybe even on Monday. It was just the other day. I just read an article that it's rising in other currencies. The dollar's strength is blinding the reality that gold and silver are performing really, really, really well in other currencies. So give it time. And as the dollar starts to lose its share of settlement transactions in energy, I think ultimately it will start to erode its reserve status. And then we will start to see gold and silver take off the way that we have always anticipated. And just have to hang on, I guess, and trust your gut.
That makes sense. And as I pulled up a moment ago, dollar index up 60 cents today. So Perhaps you could expect gold and silver to be down even a little bit more than they are. But again, has that been reflected in premiums, or are we still basically at the same levels of the last couple of weeks, or any changes there?
The U.S. Mint, it's really interesting, Chris, that we talked about the premiums on the U.S. Mint, the coin's starting to climb up a bit. I mentioned when I was on with BICS the other day, I told him the two most influential interviews I've ever heard in this industry were first yours with Bart Chilton, and second his with Jack
Sermon.
something. What's that?
I believe it was Jack's sermon.
Yeah, the guy that developed the Silver Eagles for the U.S. Mint. To me, those were the two most illuminating, and I say that seriously. I say that on all the podcasts I'm on. I say that your interview with Bart Chilton changed the way that I look at this world in terms of this gold and silver world. And what Jack said certainly blew me away to the nth degree. I think both are required listening if you are invested in metals. And so, they made over 3 million Eagles in the month of August. And that's three times what they've been making, yet still below what they have the capacity to make. I think they got so lambasted, including Representative Mooney from West Virginia, I believe, sent them a letter saying, "What the hell are you guys doing?" So interesting times. The premiums have, I think, bottomed. They've plateaued. They're not going down further. The Eagles have started to inch back up. The Mint pumped out 3 million. They came down a bit. I guess you'd say we're in a holding pattern right now. And that to me is the most befuddling thing of all. And I'm not, I try to be I try to be objective in the way that I look at things. I try to look at things the way that uh, other people would look at things. And I guess the truth of the matter is that, Chris, we're still the minority in this ecosystem of finances. We are still the minority, and until the public wakes up and realizes the importance of protecting themselves with something like a hard asset, like precious metals, the way that the central banks are doing, then I think it's going to be frustrating in terms of watching these developments, whether it be a higher price or seeing the premiums take off. They will again and again. I'll say I believe it will be the banks that light the fuse. I really do believe that there will be bank failures and bail-ins that light the fuse. So it befuddles me that the premiums aren't rising, that the demand for physical, look, don't get me wrong, it's still strong. It's not like it was in 2017. It's still very, very strong. And we're on pace to have our biggest year ever. I never thought that would be possible after last year. But my point is it should be tenfold stronger based upon what I see in this economy and what I see on a broader macro perspective. So no, premiums have not taken off yet. They've plateaued. It's a very consumer friendly market, both in price premium and also availability.
And what are people going to? We try and touch on this every month or so, but is it still silver dominant, or has gold picked up more share this year, or what's the breakdown between gold and silver looking like?
It still is substantially more silver dominant. I don't have the exact numbers, but I will tell you that since March and April, there's been an awful lot of gold investment as well. And I attribute that to the instability in the banks, where people are yanking out very, very large sums of money to protect themselves, to be their own bank. And so in that environment, you know, you could have $100,000 worth of gold right now, in your two front pockets. You'd have roughly 50 ounces in each pocket. So, you'd have some droopy pants, but point of it is you get up right now and run down the street to your car if you had to. 100 grand in silver is 250 pounds or more. So when you talk about logistics and someone pulling out, mid six figures and saying, just send me whatever you can, I want out of the bank, it lent itself to more logistic oriented trades as well. And look, I know this is a silver channel. If you look at every promotion I've done for almost 3 years, it's probably been 99.5% silver. I view it as the most undervalued asset, the value of a generation. I do mean that, honest to God. I wouldn't count out gold either. And I tell people that, when you have a tier one asset, when you have an asset that is being accumulated by the banks in greater numbers than ever before over the last 18 months, there's a lot to be said for gold, even though silver is the most attractive play on the planet. Put it all together, logistics come into play, and there are a lot of people who would rather not store things, even in a very reputable institution like Brinks. There is wisdom in the statement that if you don't own it physically, or possess it, you don't own it. Now, that's really not true, but what is true is that gold and silver are assets that maintain no counterparty risk, or are not someone's liability simultaneously with your ownership. So there is something to be said for that. And those people who want to take possession and have any semblance of being nimble, well, I think they would also add some gold into that equation. So pure value, silver takes the cake. But on very large purchases, it can become difficult if you don't want storage.
And back to what you were saying there, that I'm glad you brought that up. The if you don't hold it, you don't own it. Obviously, a lot of people cite that phrase, and I think there's credence to it. Yet, I mean, also perhaps some limits where how much gold or silver do you want to store in your safe at home? What would you say about the risks of using storage? Is that something that you're concerned about? Again, I wonder if if you had gold or silver stored in the Ukraine in a vault that was supposed to be safe, then there are conditions that seem to be popping up more and more, which can change the equation a little bit. But what could you say about the risks of storage in general, and perhaps any red flags to watch out for?
I mean, I know what you just said was somewhat silly, but it's also incredibly true. I mean, you know, the unexpected happens. And I'm not saying that there wasn't trouble brewing in the Ukraine, and I don't know how long back it goes. I'm not a student of Eastern European geopolitical events, but what I would say is that who would have ever thought that we would be blindsided by a pandemic if we were having this discussion over Thanksgiving in 2019. So unexpected happens, shit happens. And so if you're going to store your metal, I would only work with a very reputable deal or reputable institution like a Brinks, who has a very big balance sheet, who's not going to abscond with your money unless they were told by a government edict that they had to give it up. Now, look, is that a possibility? Yeah, absolutely. And anyone who stores metal understands that, or anyone asking that question understands that. But I think you weigh your options, you hope for the very best, you take every step you can to prepare for the worst. And if you're not able to possess it, then you choose the best storage option available to you. And people should also think about becoming, look, I make money in our storage program. I would tell people, absolutely store your metal personally first and foremost if you can, and get creative. Go into your backyard with a shovel at 2 a.m. and become a midnight gardener and dig a hole if you have to. But yeah, we live in a world, Chris, and gets back to what I was really talking about earlier, is why the premiums aren't going to the moon. We live in a world where I don't think anyone would be freaked out about anything anymore if it happens. With all the talks of, these flying saucers that Congress and was having meetings about, and the fact that the U.S. government's tight-lipped. I mean, if all of a sudden a bunch of flying saucers landed on the Capitol in Washington, D.C., I don't think people would be too surprised. Now, I'm saying this tongue in cheek, but what I'm saying is that we live in a world where things are just upside down, in bizarro world, it seems. So yeah, I think you're best if you can hold it yourself and remove any and all counterparty risk. I truthfully think you do have a better chance of being ripped off by the system than you do a would-be burglar in your home. With all of that being said, I have profound respect and admiration for Brinks. I've worked with them for 15 years and never raised my voice and never saw an ounce out of place. So in a world of imperfect choices, I like it as good as any. But yeah, I mean, your mind's eye can wander as far as it needs to determine what the risks would be. outside of the insurance policy, guaranteeing replacement value for theft and fire and flood and all of those things. But, act of God or nuclear war, God forbid, who knows anymore, brother? So you hold it yourself, and if that's not an option, then we have a good one for you. But your question is one that has no answer.
All right. And actually, if we did have UFOs flying around the White House, would not be the first time, as there actually is that interesting 1952 data point where there were a series of unidentified flying objects reported in Washington, although we'll leave that aside. But in terms of the storage, though, something I've thought makes a lot of sense is perhaps some diversification of storage depending upon the amount of metal you have, and perhaps using a couple of different vaults rather than placing everything in one. Is that something that makes sense as well?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, we have a storage program in Canada that I used to be much more enthusiastic about telling people about before Trudeau usurped the rule of law and due process. Now, that has nothing to do with our program, but certainly he put a stain on the way the government goes about their business in terms of Canada. I still have a lot of my own metal up in various locations up in Canada and some here in the United States also. But yeah, diversity in location is a good idea. There was a time when I believe very strongly in the fact that having metal in another jurisdiction like Switzerland or Canada made sense. But even that is becoming, questionable in terms of the way that laws are being drawn up, the way that potentially a central bank digital currency. I mean, there are things that are happening that will make it all but impossible to, you may be able to stay in one location, but when you try to come out is when you're caught, whether it be cryptocurrencies or trying to hold things in a private location, thinking you're safe from the system. Well, how safe are you from the system? So I think diversity is good in general. I think that keeping it at home and hiding it, in locations that you control is great. But if you have to store, we've given a lot of thought into our storage program, and there's great flexibility. There are a lot of things that no one can compete with in terms of the way that we've negotiated a fixed rate with BRICS and safe deposit box program with BRICS, things that no one else has. We're very proud of. I still come back to the fact that if you were able to possess it yourself, you're one leg up. But I wouldn't lose sleep over metal held in a storage facility. Being the owner of a company like I am, I can't really hold my gold and silver, obviously, especially one who's done 1,200 YouTube videos in 4 years. And so I have no choice but to use storage facilities. So I am hoping for the best. I've prepared for the worst the best I can through diversity of location and whatnot. But here again, we can only play within the confines of the game that we find ourselves in. And if you have no choice but to utilize storage, I think we got a great program for you. But always hold it your first before you do anything like that.
Already makes sense. And Andy, one other thing, we didn't touch on this last week. Actually, we had those deliveries into the registered pile from JP Morgan's vault. So we did not touch on this, but had a couple of requests to get your thoughts on the BRICS meeting following now 2 weeks ago. But following that meeting, any thoughts you had on what came out of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very, very, very relevant discussion, even though nothing earth-shattering happened. When you bring in countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates, you're talking massive major oil producers. When you bring in Argentina, you have a major agricultural producer, and actually most people don't know this, but they're the largest natural gas producer in South America. And when you bring in Ethiopia, you have the fastest growing economy in Africa. Most of the African countries want to join up with the BRICS facilities. So when you talk about the size and the scope of this, you have 30% of global GDP, and that will be as of the 1/1/24 when these countries come in. You'll have 46% of the world's population and 43% of the world's oil production. And so, not to mention 75% of these rare earth metals like manganese and 50% of graphite and 28% of nickel and 10% of copper. it's a big deal. You have 23 countries that have formally submitted their application for BRICS 2. You have 22 or 3 countries that have expressed interest in it as well. These are massive, massive events that, I don't think people are really thinking about when they talk about it really being a nothing burger, what came out of the meeting. They were expecting the price of gold to explode. They didn't issue a gold-backed settlement currency, but they came back and tasked their financial advisor, or not the financial advisor, the financial ministers of these countries to do their due diligence and come back next year and bring their findings. What I also found to be recently very relevant is that, you look at Iran, and Iran has now become a full member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the BRICS in a span of 1 year. This is massive, right? This is the sanctions that we impose upon Iran are going to be meaningless. And when you have Iran now really being involved with this massive growing union, you can really see how the rallying cry against the Western hegemony and sanctions and their coercion is changing to an environment that settles around cooperation and expansion. And it's not a good thing as far as I'm concerned. You look at Saudi Arabia, their oil exports have fallen to a 6-year low, as has their treasury holdings, which they've been selling and dumping. It's not a good thing. It's little by little by little by little by little, and then all at once. One last thing I'd like to talk about regarding 2 things actually regarding the BRICS is that Belarus is now proposing to hold a joint summit between the Eurasian Economic Union and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Now, I have talked about this forever, these 2 groups. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which Saudi Arabia has applied to and Iran has been admitted to, is the largest regional financial and military organization in the world. And the symmetry between these 2 groups and the BRICS nations and the Belt Road is uncanny. There's membership going through all of them. And the proposed meeting is to discuss the convergence of these organizations and how they can meld into BRICS. It's coming. You're seeing a larger and growing expansion of not only human population, but the utility and their GDP and all of their commodities and their military might. And all of these things are coming together. One last piece I'd like to talk about regarding the BRICS. There's been a lot of talk about, well, China and India don't like each other. Well, I'm going to read you one thing here. Chinese President Xi Jinping and Indian Prime Minister Modi agreed last week to seek a resolution to years of tensions along the Himalayan border area. So, in fact, they're agreed to direct the relevant officials to intensify efforts at expeditious disengagement and de-escalation. So these countries are choosing sides, and I think it's really important to understand that this is something that is a trend in motion, and it's not good for the dollar. And people have become accustomed to instant gratification. Typically, it's not quick enough, but this is something that I think needs to be firmly on everyone's radar. It's only going to get crazier from here, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, we'll certainly keep an eye on that, and appreciate your thoughts following the BRICS meeting. And was some substantial new additions, even if there was no gold settlement currency announced, and which I don't think means that it's not being worked on. And we've certainly heard a lot of commentary from Russia on that topic, which see how it plays out going forward. And Andy, just in wrapping up, is there anything on special for people who are in the market or looking for silver at this point?
Yeah, we have both silver and gold. We have the 2023 1/10 ounce gold eagle at $37.50 over its melt value. So you take the price of gold, divide by 10, add $37.50. And we have the Valcambi kilo silver bar at $1.99 over melt value per ounce. They're 32.15 ounces. They are amazing bars. They come with certificates of authenticity that match the number stamped on the bar. and they come in boxes of 15 if you're so inclined to buy a mint box. But great value and great utility in the gold, great value in the silver, and crazy times, Chris. I think there's going to be a lot to talk about every week. I truly, truly do. And next week we need to do this together in person, and look forward to picking up where we left off.
Well, appreciate that. And if people have questions about anything that we talked about here today or want to find out more about those specials, Arcadia at milesfranklin.com. And Andy, thank you as always for joining us this week, and look forward to doing it again next week.
Great to see you, Chris. I do as well. Talk to you soon.